Welcome to episode 10 of The Haunted Hotel. I'm Naira, with Raoul shaping the music, artwork, and final edit. In this chapter, suspicion hardens into certainty, and the line between superstition and reality begins to vanish. The hotel's secrets are no longer patient. Chapter 22. Having closed and secured the door on Lady Montbarry's departure, Agnes put on her dressing gown and, turning to her open boxes, began the business of unpacking. In the hurry of making her toilet for dinner, she had taken the first dress that lay uppermost in the trunk and had thrown her travelling costume on the bed. She now opened the doors of the wardrobe for the first time and began to hang her dresses on the hooks in the large compartment on one side. After a few minutes only of this occupation, she grew weary of it and decided on leaving the trunks as they were until the next morning. The oppressive south wind, which had blown throughout the day, still prevailed at night. The atmosphere of the room felt close. Agnes threw a shawl over her head and shoulders, and, opening the window, stepped into the balcony to look at the view. The night was heavy and overcast. Nothing could be distinctly seen. The canal beneath the window looked like a black gulf. The opposite houses were barely visible as a row of shadows, dimly relieved against the starless and moonless sky. At long intervals, the warning cry of a belated gondolier was just audible as it turned the corner of a distant canal and called to invisible boats which might be approaching him in the darkness. Now and then, the nearer dip of an oar in the water told of the villainous passage of other gondolas, bringing guests back to the hotel. Excepting these rare sounds, the mysterious night silence of Venice was literally the silence of the grave. Leaning on the parapet of the balcony, Agnes looked vacantly into the black void beneath. Her thoughts reverted to the miserable man who had broken his pledged faith to her and who had died in that house. Some change seemed to have come over her since her arrival in Venice. Some new influence appeared to be at work. For the first time in her experience of herself, compassion and regret were not the only emotions aroused in her by the remembrance of the dead Montbarry. The keen sense of the wrong that she had suffered, never yet felt by that gentle and forgiving nature, was felt by now. She found herself thinking of the bygone days, of her humiliation almost as harshly as Henry Westwick had thought of them, she who had rebuked him the last time he had spoken slightingly of his brother in her presence. A sudden fear and dread of herself startled her physically as well as morally. She turned from the shadowy abyss of the dark water as if the mystery and the gloom of it had been answerable for the emotions which had taken her by surprise. Abruptly closing the window, she threw aside her shawl and lit the candles on the mantelpiece, impelled by a sudden craving for light in the solitude of her room. The cheering brightness around her, contrasting with the black gloom outside, restored her spirits. She felt herself enjoying the light like a child. Would it be well, she asked herself, to get ready for bed? No. The sense of drowsy fatigue that she had felt half an hour since was gone. She returned to the dull employment of unpacking her boxes. After a few minutes only, the occupation became irksome to her once more. She sat down by the table and took up a guidebook. Suppose I inform myself, she thought, on the subject of Venice. Her attention wandered from the book before she had turned the first page of it. The image of Henry Westwick was the presiding image in her memory now. Recalling the minutest incidents and details of the evening, she could think of nothing which presented him under other than a favorable and interesting aspect. She smiled to herself softly. Her color rose by fine gradations as she felt the full luxury of dwelling on the perfect truth and modesty of his devotion to her. Was the depression of spirits from which she had suffered so persistently on her travels attributable by any chance to their long separation from each other, embittered perhaps by her own vain regret when she remembered her harsh reception of him in Paris? Subtly conscious of this bold question and of the self-abandonment which it implied, she returned mechanically to her book, distrusting the unrestrained liberty of her own thoughts. Would lurking temptations to forbidden tenderness find their hiding places in a woman's dressing gown when she is alone in her room at night? With her heart in the tomb of the dead Montgomery, could Agnes even think of another man and think of life? How shameful, how unworthy of her. For the second time she tried to interest herself in the guidebook, and once more she tried in vain. Throwing the book aside, she turned desperately to the one resource that was left, to her luggage, resolved to fatigue herself with that mercy until she was weary enough and sleepy enough to find a safe refuge in bed. For some little time she persisted in the monotonous occupation of transferring her clothes from her trunk to the wardrobe. The large clock in the hall striking midnight reminded her that it was getting late. She sat down for a moment in an armchair by the bedside to rest. The silence in the house now caught her attention and held it disagreeably. Was everybody in bed and asleep but herself? Surely it was time for her to follow the general example. With a certain irritable, nervous haste, she rose again and undressed herself. I have lost 2 hours of rest, she thought, frowning at the reflection of herself in the glass as she arranged her hair for the night. I shall be good for nothing tomorrow. She lit the night light and extinguished the candles, with one exception, which she removed to a little table placed on the side of the bed opposite to the side occupied by the armchair. Having put her travelling box of matches and the guidebook near the candle in case she might be sleepless and might want to read, she blew out the light and laid her head on the pillow. The curtains of the bed were looped back to let the air pass freely over her. Lying on her left side with her face turned away from the table, she could see the armchair by the dim night light. It had a chintz covering representing large bunches of roses scattered over a pale green ground. She tried to worry herself into drowsiness by counting over and over again the bunches of roses that were visible from her point of view. Twice her attention was distracted from the counting by sounds outside, by the clock chiming the half-hour past 12, and then again by the fall of a pair of boots on the upper floor, thrown out to be cleaned, without barbarous disregard of the comfort of others, which is observable in humanity when it inhabits an hotel. In the silence that followed these passing disturbances, Agnes went on counting the roses on the armchair more and more slowly. Before long she confused herself in the figures, tried to begin counting again, thought she would wait a little first, felt her eyelids drooping and her head reclining lower and lower on the pillow, sighed faintly and sank into sleep. How long that first sleep lasted she never knew. She could only remember in the aftertime that she woke instantly. Every faculty and perception in her passed the boundary line between insensibility and consciousness, so to speak, at a leap. Without knowing why, she sat up suddenly the bed, listening for she knew not what. Her head was in a whirl, her heart beat furiously without any assignable cause, but one trivial event had happened during the interval while she had been asleep. The night light had gone out, and the room, as a matter of course, was in total darkness. She felt for the matchbox and paused after finding it. A vague sense of confusion was still in her mind. She was in no hurry to light the match. The pause in the darkness was, for the moment, agreeable to her. In the quieter flow of her thoughts during this interval, she could ask herself the natural question: what cause had awakened her so suddenly and had so strangely shaken her nerves? Had it been the influence of a dream? She had not dreamed at all, or, to speak more correctly, she had no working remembrance of having dreamed. The mystery was beyond her fathoming. The darkness began to oppress her. She struck the match on the box and lit her candle. As the welcome light diffused itself over the room, she turned from the table and looked towards the other side of the bed. In the moment when she turned, the chill of a sudden terror gripped her around the height, as with a clasp of an icy hand. She was not alone in her room. There, in the chair at the bedside, there, subtly revealed under the flow of light from the candle, was the figure of a woman reclining. Her head lay back over the chair, her face turned up to the ceiling, had the eyes closed as if she was wrapped in a deep sleep. The shock of the discovery held Agnes speechless and helpless. Her first conscious action when she was in some degree mistress of herself again was to lean over the bed and to look closer at the woman who had so incomprehensibly stolen into her room in the dead of the night. One glance was enough. She started back with a cry of amazement. The person in the chair was no other than the widow of the dead Montbarry, the woman who had warned her that they were to meet again and that the place might be Venice. Her courage returned to her, stung into action by the natural sense of indignation which the presence of the Countess provoked. "Wake up," she called out. "How dare you come here? How did she get in? Leave the room, or I will call for help." She raised her voice at the last words. It produced no effect. Leaning farther over the bed, she boldly took the Countess by the shoulder and shook her. Not even this effort succeeded in rousing the sleeping woman. She still lay back in the chair, possessed by a torpor like the torpor of death, insensible to sound, insensible to touch. Was she really sleeping, or had she fainted? Agnes looked closer at her. She had not fainted. Her breathing was audible, rising and falling in deep, heavy gasps. At intervals she ground her teeth savagely. Beads of perspiration stood thickly on her forehead. Her clenched hands rose and fell slowly from time to time on her lap. Was she in the agony of a dream, or was she spiritually conscious of something hidden in the room? The doubt involved in that last question was unendurable. Agnes determined to rouse the servants who kept watch in the hotel at night. The bell handle was fixed to the wall on the side of the bed by which the table stood. She raised herself from the crouching position which she had assumed in looking close at the Countess, and turning towards the other side of the bed, stretched out her hand to the bell. At the same instant, she stopped and looked upward. Her hand fell helplessly at her side. She shuddered and sank back on the pillow. What had she seen? She had seen another intruder in her room. Midway between her face and the ceiling, there hovered a human head, severed at the neck like a head struck from the body by the guillotine. Nothing visible, nothing audible, had given her any intelligible warning of its appearance. Silently and suddenly the head had taken its place above her. No supernatural change had passed over the room or was perceptible in it now. The dumbly tortured figure in the chair, the broad window opposite the foot of the bed with the black night beyond it, the candle burning on the table, these and all other objects in the room remained unaltered. One object more, unutterably horrid, had been added to the rest. That was the only change, no more, no less. By the yellow candlelight she saw the head distinctly hovering in mid-air above her. She looked at it steadfastly, spellbound by the terror that held her. The flesh of the face was gone. The shriveled skin was darkened in hue like the skin of an Egyptian mummy, except at the neck. There it was of a lighter color. There it showed spots and splashes of the hue of that brown spot on the ceiling, which the child's fanciful terror had distorted into the likeness of a spot of blood. Thin remains of a discolored mustache and whiskers hanging over the upper lip and over the hollows where the cheeks had once been, made the head just recognizable as the head of a man. Over all the features, death and time had done their obliterating work. The eyelids were closed, the hair and the skull discolored like the hair and the face had been burnt away in places. The bluish lips, pouted in a fixed grin, showed the double row of teeth. By slow degrees, the hovering head, perfectly still when she first saw it, began to descend towards Agnes as she lay beneath. By slow degrees, that strange, dully blended odour which the commissioners had discovered in the vaults of the old palace, which had sickened Francis Westwick in the bedchamber of the new hotel, spread its fetid exhalations over the room. Downward and downward the hideous apparition made its slow progress, until it stalked close over Agnes, stopped and turned slowly, so that the face of it confronted the upturned face of the woman in the chair. There was a pause, then a supernatural movement disturbed the rigid repose of the dead face. The closed eyelids opened slowly, the eyes revealed themselves bright with the glassy film of death, and fixed their dreadful look on the woman in the chair. Agnes saw that look, saw the eyelids of the living woman open slowly, like the eyelids of the dead, saw her rise as if in obedience to some silent command, and saw no more. Her next conscious impression was of the sunlight pouring in at the window, of the friendly presence of Lady Montbarry at the bedside, and of the children's wandering faces peeping in at the door.
If you like this audio story, please consider to subscribe the channel and let us know what you like the most in this presentation.
Chapter 23. You have some influence over Agnes. Try what you can do, Henry, to make her take a sensible view of the matter. There is really nothing to make a fuss about. My wife's maid knocked at her door early in the morning with a customary cup of tea. Getting no answer, she went round to the dressing room, found the door on that side unlocked, and discovered Agnes on the bed in a fainting fit. With my wife's help, they brought her to herself again, and she told the extraordinary story which I have just repeated to you. You must have seen for yourself that she has been over-fatigued, poor thing, by our long railway journeys. Her nerves are out of order, and she is just the person to be easily terrified by a dream. She obstinately refuses, however, to accept this rational view. Don't suppose that I have been severe with her. All that a man can do to humour her I have done. I have written to the Countess in her assumed name, offering to restore the room to her. She writes back, positively declining to return to it. I have accordingly arranged, so as not to have the thing known in the hotel, to occupy the room for 1 or 2 nights, and to leave Agnes to recover her spirits under my wife's care. Is there anything more that I can do? Whatever questions Agnes has asked of me I've answered to the best of my ability. She knows all that you told me about Francis and the Countess last night, but try as I may, I can't quiet her mind. I have given up the attempt in despair and left her in the drawing room. Go like a good fellow and try what you can do to compose her." In those words, Lord Montbarry stated the case to his brother from the rational point of view. Henry made no remark. He went straight to the drawing room. He found Agnes walking rapidly backwards and forwards, flushed and excited. "If he come here to say what your brother has been saying to me," she broke out before he could speak, "spare yourself the trouble. I don't want common sense, I want a true friend who will believe in me." "I am that friend, Agnes," Henry answered quietly, "and you know it. Do you really believe that I am not deluded by a dream?" "I know that you are not deluded in one particular at least." "In what particular?" "In what we have said of the Countess. It is perfectly true." Agnes stopped him there. "Why do I only hear this morning that the Countess and Mrs. James are one and the same person?" she asked distressfully. "Why was I not told of it last night?" "You forget that we had accepted the exchange of rooms before I reached Venice," Henry replied. "I felt strongly tempted to tell you even then, but your sleeping arrangements for the night were all made. I should only have inconvenienced and alarmed you. I waited till the morning after hearing from my brother that he had yourself seen to get security from any intrusion. How that intrusion was accomplished it is impossible to say. I can only declare that the Countess's presence by your bedside last night was no dream of yours. On her own authority I can testify that it was a reality. On her own authority? Agnes repeated eagerly. Have you seen her this morning? I have seen her not 10 minutes since. What was she doing? She was busily engaged in writing. I could not even get her to look at me until I thought of mentioning your name. She remembered me, of course. She remembered you with some difficulty. Finding that she wouldn't answer me in any other terms, I questioned her as if I had come direct from you. Then she spoke. She not only admitted that she had the same superstitious motive for placing Lou in that room which she had acknowledged to Francis, she even owned that she had been by your bedside watching through the night to see what you saw, as she expressed it. Hearing this, I tried to persuade her to tell me how she got into the room. Unluckily, her manuscript and the table caught her eye. She returned to her writing. The Baron wants money, she said. I must get on with my play. What she saw or dreamed while she was in her room last night it is at present impossible to discover, but judging by my brother's account of her, as well as by what I remember of her myself, some recent influence has been at work which has produced a marked change in this wretched woman for the worse. Her mind since last night perhaps is partially deranged. One proof of it is that she spoke to me of the Baron as if he were still a living man. When Francis saw her, she declared that the Baron was dead, which is the truth. The United States consul at Milan showed us the announcement of the death in an American newspaper. So far as I can see, such sense as she still possesses seems to be entirely absorbed in one absurd idea, the idea of writing a play for Francis to bring out at his theatre. He admits that he encouraged her to hope she might get money in this way. I think he did wrong. Don't you agree with me? Without heeding the question, Agnes rose abruptly from her chair. Do me one more kindness, Henry, she said. Take me to the Countess at once. Henry hesitated. Are you composed enough to see her after the shock that you have suffered? He asked. She trembled. The flush on her face died away and left it deadly pale, but she held to her resolution. You have heard of what I saw last night, she said faintly. Don't speak of it, Henry interposed. Don't uselessly agitate yourself. I must speak. My mind is full of horrid questions about it. I know I can't identify it, and yet I ask myself over and over again, in whose likeness did it appear? Was it in the likeness of Ferrari, or was it... She stopped, shuddering. The Countess knows. I must see the Countess, she resumed vehemently. Whether my courage fails me or not, I must make the attempt. Take me to her before I have time to feel afraid of it. Henry looked at her anxiously. If you are really sure of your own resolution, he said, I agree with you. The sooner to see her, the better. You remember how strangely she talked of your influence over her when she forced her way into your room in London. I remember it perfectly. Why do you ask? For this reason, in the present state of her mind, I doubt if she will be much longer capable of realizing her wild idea of you as the avenging angel who is to bring her to a reckoning for her evil deeds. It may be well to try what your influence can do while she's still capable of feeling it. He waited to hear what Agnes would say. She took his arm and led him in silence to the door. They ascended to the second floor and, after knocking, entered the Countess's room. She was still busily engaged in writing. When she looked up from the paper and saw Agnes, a vacant expression of doubt was the only expression in her wild black eyes. After a few moments, the lost remembrances and associations appeared to return slowly to her mind. The pen dropped from her hand. Haggard and trembling, she looked closer at Agnes and recognized her at last. "Has the time come already?" she said in low, awestruck tones. "Give me a little longer respite. I haven't done my writing yet." She dropped on her knees and held out her clasped hands entreatingly. Agnes was far from having recovered after the shock that she had suffered in the night. Her nerves were far from being equal to the strain that was now laid on them. She was so startled by the change in the Countess that she was at a loss what to say or to do next. Henry was obliged to speak to her. "Put your questions while you have the chance," he said, lowering his voice. "See, the vacant look is coming over her face again." Agnes tried to rally her courage. "You were in my room last night," she began. Before she could add a word more, the Countess lifted her hands and wrung them above her head with a low moan of horror. Agnes shrank back and turned as if to leave the room. Henry stopped her and whispered to her to try again. She obeyed him after an effort. "I slept last night in the room that you gave up to me," she resumed. "I saw—" The Countess suddenly rose to her feet. "No more of that," she cried. "Oh, Jesu Maria, do you think I want to be told what you saw? Do you think I don't know what it means for you and for me? Decide for yourself, miss. Examine your own mind. Are you well assured that the day of reckoning has come at last? Are you ready to follow me back through the crimes of the past to the secrets of the dead?" She returned again to the writing table without waiting to be answered. Her eyes flashed. She looked like her old self once more. She spoke. It was only for a moment. The old ardor and impetuosity were nearly worn out. Her head sank. She sighed heavily as she unlocked a desk which stood on the table. Opening a drawer in the desk, she took out a leaf of vellum covered with faded writing. Some ragged ends of silken thread were still attached to the leaf, as if it had been torn out of a book. "Can you read Italian?" she asked, handing the leaf to Agnes. Agnes answered silently by an inclination of her head. "The leaf," the Countess proceeded, "once belonged to a book in the old library of the palace, while this building was still a palace. By whom it was torn out you have no need to know. For what purpose it was torn out you may discover for yourself, if you will. Read it first at the 5th line from the top of the page." Agnes felt the serious necessity of composing herself. "Give me a chair," she said to Henry, "and I will do my best." He placed himself behind her chair so that he could look over her shoulder and help her to understand the writing on the leaf. Rendered into English, it ran as follows. "I have now completed my literary survey of the first floor of the palace. At the desire of my noble and gracious patron, the lord of this glorious edifice, I next ascend to the 2nd floor and continue my catalogue or description of the pictures, decorations, and other treasures of art therein contained. Let me begin with a corner room at the western extremity of the palace, called the Room of the Caryatides, from the statues which support the mantelpiece. This work is of comparatively recent execution. It dates from the 18th century only, and reveals the correct taste of the period in every part of it. Still, there is a certain interest which attaches to the mantelpiece. It conceals a cleverly constructed hiding place between the floor of the room and the ceiling of the room beneath, which was made during the last evil days of the Inquisition in Venice, and which is reported to have saved an ancestor of my gracious lord pursued by that terrible tribunal. The machinery of this curious place of concealment has been kept in good order by the present lord as a species of curiosity. He condescended to show me the method of working it. Approaching the two caryatids, rest your hand on the forehead midway between the eyebrows of the figure which is on your left as you stand opposite to the fireplace. Then press the head inwards as if you were pushing it against the wall behind. By doing this, you set in motion the hidden machinery in the wall, which turns the hearthstone on a pivot and discloses the whole place below. There is room enough in it for a man to lie easily at full length. The method of closing the cavity again is equally simple. Place both your hands in the temples of the figures, pull as if you were pulling it towards you, and the hearthstone will revolve into its proper position again. You need read no farther, said the Countess. Be careful to remember what you have read. She put back the page of vellum in her writing desk, locked it, and led the way to the door. Come, she said, and see what the mocking Frenchman called the beginning of the end. Agnes was barely able to rise from her chair. She trembled from head to foot. Henry gave her his arm to support her. Fear nothing, he whispered. I shall be with you. The Countess proceeded along the westward corridor and stopped at the door numbered 38. This was the room which had been inhabited by Baron Drivard in the old days of the palace. It was situated immediately over the bedchamber in which Agnes had passed the night. For the last 2 days the room had been empty. The absence of luggage in it when they opened the door showed that it had not yet been let. You see, said the Countess, pointing to the carved figure at the fireplace, and you know what to do. Have I deserved that you should temper justice with mercy? She went on in lower tones. Give me a few more hours to myself. The Baron wants money. I must get on with my play. She smiled vacantly and imitated the action of writing with her right hand as she pronounced the last words. The effort of concentrating her weakened mind on other and less familiar topics than the constant want of money in the Baron's lifetime, and the vague prospect of gain from the still unfinished play, had evidently exhausted her poor reserves of strength. When her request had been granted, she addressed no expressions of gratitude to Agnes. She only said, Feel no fear, miss, of my attempting to escape you. Where you are, there I must be till the end comes. Her eyes wandered round the room with a last weary and stupefied look. She returned to her writing with slow and feeble steps, like the steps of an old woman.
You've reached the end of episode 10 of The Haunted Hotel, narrated by Nayara with music, art and editing by Raoul. Only a few chapters remain and the truth is now impossible to ignore. Join us for episode 11.